next, I'm very excited, very happy to present my colleague from Brandon University, Kevin McKenzie. We worked together on this exhibition that you're all invited to at 5 o'clock today. Kevin McKenzie is Cree Métis, born in Regina, Saskatchewan. He's a member of Cowessess First Nation in Saskatchewan Treaty 4. He holds a BFA and MFA from the University of Regina. During his 30-year art practice, McKenzie has exhibited nationally and internationally. Notable exhibitions include Changing Hands, Art Without Reservation 2, at the Museum of Art and Design in New York. He also participated in Don't Stop Me Now at the National Gallery of Canada, If We Never Met at Pawtucka Art Gallery Museum in New Zealand. His work is represented in Transformer, Native Art in Light and Sound at the National Museum of the American Indian Smithsonian Institute in New York that ran from 2017 to 2019. His work was selected as the inaugural exhibition titled ASAP at Urban Shaman Contemporary Aboriginal Art Satellite Gallery in Santa Fe via Vital Spaces Santa Fe in New Mexico. McKenzie's artwork is represented in the collections of the National Gallery of Canada, the McKenzie Art Gallery, Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada, Manitoba Hydro Corporation, the President's Art Collection, University of Regina, First Nations University of Canada, Comox Valley Art Gallery, the Saskatchewan Arts Board, and the Dunlop Art Gallery. He has a permanent public sculpture in Whistler, BC, commissioned by VANOC, Cultural Olympiad 2010. In 2022, he was commissioned by the President's Office at Brandon University to produce a public sculpture dedicated to truth and reconciliation titled Healing Together. McKenzie lives in Brandon, Manitoba. He works at Brandon University as a professor at Ishkabatin Wasaka Inabateg, and my Anishinaabe Moan isn't perfect either, so please join me in welcoming Kevin McKenzie.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to thank Dr. Stacey Koosel for curating me into the Indigenous Art Intensive. I'm very thrilled to be here. It's nice to see Tanya Willard, and thank you for hosting this event. And Brian, thanks for working with me, or working together to get my work down here in the crates, and then installing all the work, and then some of the wiring issues with the neon pieces. I'm glad that was all resolved. Let me grab the switcher. There's a little story about this photograph. Basically, it was taken in New York at the National Museum of the American Indian. So there was a bunch of us standing outside on the stairwell, and my good friend Jordan Bennett was taking some pictures, and I said, "Hey, get a picture of me." And so he took a picture of me, and then he showed it to me and said, "Hey, I like that picture. I like that movie star." So I use it in a lot of my, whenever somebody needs my photo for a presentation, I use this one a lot. I've got Caravaggio's picture up here, the 16th century artist. Basically, for the longest time, Caravaggio was one of my favorite painters of all time. And I was thinking about this moment of synchronicity. Basically, I was part of a big exhibition at the National Gallery of Canada called Don't Stop Me Now, curated by Dana Warren. And when I got to the National Gallery, I found out that Caravaggio had an exhibition there as well. So it was my favorite artist and myself exhibiting at the National Gallery at the same time. And so I got to go in and see Caravaggio's exhibition, and this is okay, so this painting, John the Baptist in the Wilderness, is one of Caravaggio's most famous paintings. It's massive. This thing is like almost 7 feet high, 5 feet wide. And I remember going into the Caravaggio show, I was so overwhelmed with emotion, because got to see my favorite artist. I was about this close to John the Baptist, the painting, and I started crying because I was so emotional, and I was restrained by the security guard. Because they were like, you can't get any tears on Caravaggio's painting. So yeah, I almost cried on Caravaggio's painting. I was overjoyed. But it was, I call it a moment of synchronicity because it's basically, I guess the universe wanted me to see this Caravaggio exhibition. And so, yeah, I was very grateful for that. Next. I'm going to talk a little bit about an artist that I kind of hung out with back in the early 2000s in Vancouver. It basically, it was kind of an underground art crowd that hung out with one of the main sort of proponents of the lowbrow art scene. His name was 12 Midnight, and oddly enough, there seems to be a lot of connection between his work and my current work that's on display here at Honky Tonk Chapel. It's very, very similar to what the Lord of Lowbrow was doing back then. And so his work was very influential to me in a way. I really appreciated that lowbrow crowd and even the way the sort of methodology of the lowbrow, I guess, techniques that were employed. Next. And so, 12 Midnight, he uses a lot of iconography from rock and roll, tattoo culture, graffiti culture, and just basically like street art. And he also used a lot of neon in his work, and I think that that possibly kind of influenced a little bit of my work as well. And he also worked a lot with like found imagery, basically from comic strips and things like that. So he was quite well known for this type of art here. And so there's obviously another connection to this in my work in Honky Tonk Chapel. So you'll see that. If you haven't seen the show, then you'll see that connection. So I don't mind making those connections to somebody like 12 Midnight because he was quite well known in the Vancouver art scene. Maybe Tanya, you might have known him. Yeah. So there was 12 Midnight, and then there was also another sort of well-known lowbrow artist was I Brain Eater. He was kind of a musician, and he did a lot of this so-called lowbrow art. So I kind of gravitated towards that type of crowd. Yes. So I'm just going to talk briefly about Charlene Vickers because she's one of the Indigenous artists that I present in my classroom situations, and I use her methodology a lot for these for my students to follow as well. Yes. So I really appreciated her moccasin series, and I actually get my students to do their own version of these contemporary moccasins. And I actually showed Charlene some of my students' work, and her reaction, response was, "That's better than my work." So it's really inspiring to have somebody like Charlene to present to my students, and then also to use her methodology as well in my pedagogy. So it's nice to do that. Next. So I'm going to talk a little bit about artist intent and motivation. Back around 2002, I was trying to infiltrate the Western institutions to get my art exhibited, which seemed like it was really tough to do that. And I really had to think about it and do something that I thought would be promote my culture, my identity, but also at the same time do it in sort of a fashion that hadn't really necessarily been done before. And so I applied to the Canada Council for a grant, and my grant was only 2 paragraphs long, and it said something like, I want to make a mold of a buffalo skull, and then cast it in polyurethane resin and exhibit it in different institutions. And I did get that grant, and I think the only reason I got that grant is because it was the shortest grant ever. As I've been on the Kansas Council a few times. Those are like 15-page grants, and the art speak is like really, you need a thesaurus to get through half of it. And so, next. So this is what I came up with. It's basically, once I did get the grant, I hired a technician to help me make the mold, and then this is one of the positives. And right off the bat, these works went right into a few institutions because I promised that they would get some of these pieces. So this was sort of my sort of big step to sort of, like I said, infiltrate some of these institutions. Next. And here's the piece that I made later on. It was basically, this is called Ghost of God. One of the things about my work, Dana Warren wrote an essay about it a few years ago, and it was more or less about the Buffalo Skull series, and she attributes this work to maybe their self-portraits, because basically I'm using the Christian iconography. I didn't grow up on the land, or I didn't grow up in my First Nation community. I grew up in the city of Regina. I was very close to what we call the hood in Regina, and we didn't have access to our First Nation community, our language, or our culture. We had more or less, I was brought up as a Christian, so my later works reflect that. It's basically, this work is a very large Christian cross made out of acrylic. It's got a circle of neon and then the buffalo skull in the middle. And so when I made this piece, it was intentionally made to be confrontational. And I thought it would have this sort of confrontational impact, but it didn't. Because people looked at it and they thought it was just an aesthetically pleasing sculpture. And so I found out that the confrontation was in me. So having the Christian upbringing, and then discovering my Indigenous religious beliefs and things like that, going to ceremony and finding out the buffalo skull was the center of that, of the ceremonies most of the time. And so it didn't cause any wave only with me. So it may have resolved something in me personally, but it was more or less, that's where the conflict was, and probably still remains. Next. And this is just another version of it. This is in the permanent collection of the Saskatchewan Arts Board. And it does get exhibited quite often through the Arts Board. This was just a little advertisement that the Indian Arts Center put out in 2002 or 2003 when they acquired 3 of these skulls for their permanent collection. And so I was kind of really happy and proud to be part of that little pamphlet that they handed out. Of course, I was way younger there too. And so this was the Don't Stop Me Now at the National Gallery of Canada. And so the National Gallery of Canada purchased 4 of these skulls for their permanent collection as well. And this was the moment where I ran into the Caravaggio exhibition as well. So I thought I was so honored to be part of the Don't Stop Me Now and be part of this the National Gallery of Canada exhibition. It was something that it took a long time to achieve to get to that point, and I think I was bothering the curator there so many times at the National Gallery, Greg Hill. Every time he saw me, he was like, "Oh my God, there's Kevin." And so then I think when my pieces finally got acquired at the National Gallery of Canada, he was the one that said, "Oh my God, thank God Kevin's work is in here. Now you can leave me alone." So, but that was curated by Dana Warren, and Dana and I have worked together for 20-some years already. I think I was her first exhibition back in 2002, and so one of the things I tell young artists and my students is if you want to advance your career in the visual arts or you advance your art practice, hook up with a young, up-and-coming curator, and that curator will take you everywhere they go. So that's been the case with Dana and I. Next. So this is an exhibition I did for Urban Shaman Art Gallery, and this was their satellite gallery in Santa Fe, New Mexico. They gave me a very, very short notice to put the show together, and so we had a conference call with myself, Dana Warren, and Amber Dawn Barrow, who lives in Santa Fe, Mexico, who's a curator, educator, and fashion mogul. And so I remember the conference call that we were on. They said, "Okay, we need you to get the show together like within a month, and then we need you to also get a title for the exhibition because it's coming really quick." And I said, "All right, I'll get a title for you ASAP." And so then they thought that I meant the title would be ASAP. So I just left it. I said, "Okay, whatever, put it, it's ASAP." So I thought it was, it's kind of funny, but it was really spur of the moment, and I thought it worked really well. Next. And so for this exhibition, I was putting together some work where I was building these little frames and then finding objects that I could stretch like skin. And so this is obviously a condom, and it's weird because in condom, I guess, in their advertisements, they state that it's just like skin. So I thought, okay, well, we'll stretch it like the skin. Next. Yeah, this is for the same show. We did a series of pipes, and I cast them in polyurethane as well. There was a little bit of backlash against this process, but in the long run, it's basically I'm the one that's producing the work, and so the backlash wasn't. It was basically because I was on Facebook and people were saying, "Well, you shouldn't have ceremonial pipes, with that type of material, and blah blah blah." And I said, "Well, that's just the way it is. That's the material I work with." But I really liked the pipes in these polyurethane with these kind of neonish colors. And in the background is another skull. Next. So that's just another version of the installation taken by a professional photographer, R.C. Ramirez. And so it was nice to get that published. Next. And so there's one of my fans that I've got. He's really enjoying this exhibition. Does anybody know who that is? It's Wes Studi, yeah. I'm very fortunate to almost every time I've been to Santa Fe, I get to meet up with Wes Studi, and so we're almost like old buddies now, and so it's always nice to hang out with him. He's got some really interesting stories, but he was really intrigued by these pipes, and so I had to sort of explain what was going on there. Next. And there's another one. This one would be more defined as a self-portrait because of the iconography just kind of wrapped around the piece. I found it very almost industrial, and so industrial by industrial I mean sort of the genre of industrial music and industrial, I guess the way that they adorn themselves in that genre with numerous crosses and chains and things like that. So I think it's a good reflection of that. So it could be another self-portrait. Next. And this is just a little artist statement that I had regarding this exhibition, so don't bother reading it. I just explained it. Okay, next. This is a show I did. This was a traveling exhibition. Went to the Medicine Hat, the Esplanade Arts Center. I think this was at the Esplanade Arts Center. It was called Resurrection. And this was the one exhibition that I had that included nothing but the skulls. And it was basically next. It's not the original Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. It's Father, Son, and Holy Ghost 2. And it's kind of a replica of the original. The original is here. And the original is a little bit more well-known. Next. So we had the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, and then I had 12 skulls that represented the 12 apostles. And so, yeah, it was a pretty interesting show. And like I said, I wanted to do at least one show with nothing but the skull series. Next. And this went to the Moose Jaw Art Gallery Museum as well. Next. So this is kind of a strange image because this is at the MoMA in New York. So, and this is a piece by Jasper Johns. This is Jasper Johns was one of my favorite pop artists of all time, and so this was the only one I could find in MoMA. Really wanted to sort of remember that moment and get a photo with Jasper Johns' piece. I do remember also the one piece that I really wanted to see was Object by Marie Oppenheim, which is the bowl with the teacup and the bowl with fur around it. And I was looking for it, and I was walking through the gallery, and I bumped into it, and I almost knocked it off the plant it was on. So, thank God it didn't fall over. Next. So this was at when we were going to the opening of the Transformer Native Art and Light and Sound. So Dane and I were going together, and this was in Brooklyn, and there was, I don't know, there was a strange light shining on this metal beam, and so I told Dane, I said, hey, I'm going to stand beside that beam, can you get a picture of me? She said, okay. And so I just like that situation in Brooklyn, where you're kind of standing around and there's nothing but sort of like garbage and stuff hanging around, and graffiti and things like that. And I thought it was kind of an interesting photo for the moment. Next. This is me in the New York subway with my buckskin jacket on, and I remember walking around New York, and everybody was kind of amazed at me, and I got a lot of second looks. People were looking. It's almost as if they had never seen an Indigenous man with a buckskin jacket on, with a beaded buckskin jacket on. And so I became the center of attention, and I remember standing on the steps of the museum, and people were literally coming up to me, "Can I get a picture of you with my auntie? Can I get a picture of you with my grandma?" And so it was almost like, yeah, I was a tourist attraction. But I remember waiting across the street, and then the light turned green, and there was this gigantic guy who must have been 7 feet high, and he came right up to me and right towards me and stopped, and he said to me, "That jacket's dope." I said, "Thanks." So I never ran into any confrontation. I think people were just sort of amazed at sort of seeing an Indigenous male, in a fancy jacket. Next. So this is the Father, Son, Holy Ghost at the National Museum of the American Indian. At the opening, we had a lot of press there, and we did get a lot of press for this particular exhibition because the New Yorkers were really amazed at the scope of this exhibition. And I don't think a lot of people were prepared for this whole notion of contemporary Indigenous art forms, and so people were pretty amazed by it. Next. And so here's our triptych. It's on the Metro paper, and it says this is what Native American art looks like in the 21st century. So we managed to get the triptych on there as well. So it's been around, this piece. And so we did quite a bit of press, and the story behind the title of the exhibition was another person wrote a story and was writing about my work, and they were saying, "Oh, when I went into McKenzie's installation, it was I was meditating, like I was meditating in a chapel." And then she said, "Or a honky tonk." so I like that collision between two cultures of the chapel and the honky tonk, and I think that the work that's represented there definitely covers both. Next. So this is just some of the Ghost and God again was part of this other big show in Saskatchewan called Wanted, and it got it was the center of attention for a lot of this exhibition as well. Next. Okay, I'm going to quickly go through these ones. This is sort of the process of me constructing one of these buffalo skulls. It is quite a process, so next. 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 So the mold itself was a very expensive process. I had a technician help me build it. The materials cost a fortune, and well, this one mold, I think I did get about 10 positives out of that. Next. 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 So this is the neon installation of the pieces. The neon was commissioned on an artist that was working with neon in Regina, Saskatchewan of all places, out of his garage. And he was about 85 years old. And I was asking him, hey, do you need like an assistant or a helper for this, in order for me to sort of gain some knowledge about how to work with neon? And he said no. he was taking that knowledge to the grave with him. He wasn't going to share it with anybody. So I thought, that's okay. Well, at least we're working together. And so we would measure everything out, and then he would design the piece, and then I would install it onto the skull itself. So if there's any discrepancies with the wiring, it's definitely me. Okay, next. Those are weird slides. Oh yeah, there it is. So yeah, this piece, for this particular presentation, it has come up quite a bit, so go see it in the gallery. It has its own presence. The great thing about the space here at the Fina Gallery is it's quite a small space, but this the triptych really activates that space, and so it works really well in there. Next. Okay, introduction to tradition. There's been a few things that have changed in my life and my art practice. And one thing was when I moved to Brandon University to take my position at the university there, I would be teaching traditional art forms which I did not have any knowledge of. The good thing is that the minute I landed at Brandon University, Dr. Kathy Mattis took me under her wing, and I was her mentor, and Elder Barb Blind took me under her wing as well. So I had to learn traditional art forms like beading, quill work, animal hair tufting, and I basically, my learning curve was really quick because I would be teaching it the next year. So the first year I was there, I was Kathy Mattis' assistant, so I did everything that she was doing. And next. And so these are like my first 3 projects, doing beadwork. Next. This is my first poppy. The other great thing about being at Brandon University was not only working with Kathy Mattis and Barb Blind. We have at Brandon University the oldest beading group at the university in Canada. And so every Tuesday from 5:30 till 8, we have a beading group that's welcome to, everybody's welcome, the public, all students from Brandon University. And we have every level of bead worker there, right from a student who hasn't done any beading to the very extreme, well-knowledged bead workers that have probably been beading for 40, 50 years. And that's where the real knowledge really takes place, when you start asking the elder beaders questions and ask them techniques, and they will show you, and you will learn very, very quickly from them. And a good example is a student came in there that didn't know how to bead at all, and within 2 weeks they were doing a pair of moccasins with the vamps and everything. So if you really want to learn and you really wanted to advance your the knowledge, at our beading group is one of the best places for that. Or consult any elder about that. Okay, next. There's some of my quill work. Next. It's one of my big beading projects at Big U. Next. This is a necktie that I designed, and it included, next, included quill work and then the horsehair. And it was just hanging in my studio for the longest time. I didn't know what to do with it. And so next, I designed a couple of rings at that time too. I thought rings were really interesting to have as a beaded object. I hadn't seen too many rings before. Next. This was the first really large project, which included beadwork, animal hair tufting, and quill work. And so this was a cell phone case, and Kathy Mattis was saying that, okay, if you design like a big project, you have to gift it. And I said, I'm not gifting this. It took me so long, it took me to make this. And so I was really reluctant to gift it. And, but in the end, I did gift it to somebody. And I thought it was a really great gesture. I felt really good about it later. Next. This is another like big project. And this is a bracelet I designed. I actually am wearing it right now. It's not gifted. I went through a lot to design this. I designed it right from scratch. It includes a lot of leather working techniques, and then beading and things like that. It took me quite a while to get it finished. And then I remember when I tried it on, I felt very empowered. And so it's now titled the Empowerment Bracelet. So I get my students to make a bracelet like this in class as well, and they have amazing stories to go through. But whenever anybody asks me about this piece, and is that for sale? I go, no, it's not for sale. I said, but if you enroll in my class, you can make one. So all you have to do is move to Brandon for a semester, and you can make one. Next. Yeah, when I first moved to Brandon, all of a sudden there was a mukluk workshop as well, so I jumped right into that, and we had 4 sessions of 2 hours, and we made and completed a pair of mukluks. Next. So I was very much immersed into traditional art culture, as opposed to my contemporary art practice, which I was very isolated and not connected to community at all, and not consulting with anybody but me. So it was a very isolating experience, but it had its ups and downs. But now I was totally immersed into the traditional art forms. Next. So remember that tie a few slides back? There was a shirt in my studio, and it was in the cellophane wrapper, and my mom gave it to me, and it used to belong to my grandpa. And then one day I took it out of the wrapper, and I thought, what am I going to do with this? And that tie was hanging on the wall, and I thought, maybe if I bring these two things together, it might make something. And so I brought them together, and then instantly I knew it was a very strong piece. And it's called Shifter, which means it's shifting the power, I guess, the power from the colonial power to the indigenous power. And so this piece was collected by the Indian Art Center in their juried exhibition, so it went through a jury process. And sometimes you never know what you have in your studio until you start putting things together. And so I thought that was an amazing sort of process. Okay, next. Okay, this is the change in trajectory. Especially in my art practice as a sculptor. I was working with Elder Barb Blind. The great thing about, I teach 3 Indigenous art classes at Brandon University. And bar blind is in every one of my classes. So I have an elder directly with me to consult. So the knowledge goes from Barb to me and directly to my students. And, but mostly to me in many ways, because Barb has so much of that knowledge. We were making rattles and drums one time, and I had never worked with the Alk Rawhide, and I was, handling it, and we made the rattles and the drums. And I was telling Barb, I said, the Alk Rawhide reminds me of high-tech material like carbon fiber, Kevlar, or polyurethane, which are materials I've worked with in the past. And Barb said, no. She goes, this is the high-tech material, meaning the Alk Rawhide. So next. So this is where everything changed, because basically in the past I was using parts of actual objects and then trying to indigenize them somehow to make another object. Next. Next. Next, there's the Alk Rawhide. Next. So what I did was I broke the object down to its essential parts, and instead of using those plastic parts, I molded the Alk Rawhide around those parts because of what Barb Blind had said. If that's the high-tech material, then I can use it in an industrial manner and mold it around objects, much like they would do with the plastic parts. Next. And so I would make patterns and cut them right out of the Alk Rawhide, and this was a game changer for me. And so next, I'd cut them out with rawhide. Next, and then mold them around the parts with these crazy little plastic clips. Once the Alk Rawhide dries, I would coat it with an acrylic medium about 5 times, and that would seal the rawhide. Next. Next. So there's all the parts are coming together. So basically, once I have the components, then the components have to be reassembled. Next. It is quite a process. Next. And then we have an object. So what this basically is a simulation, and through that simulation process, the original object is destroyed, and we have, through the introduction, we have a brand new indigenous object. Next. So this was the prototype of that process of molding the Alk Rawhide and then creating a unique indigenous object. Next. So this was sort of the game changer. Next. We'll go through these quickly. Next. This was just my artist studio when I was at the U of R. Next. I made a pair of buffalo skull speakers, and they were amazing. I drove everybody nuts at the University of Regina with those speakers, because they play all kinds of crazy music and disrupt everybody in their studios. Next. Okay, 17 was the show that showcased that technique that I just recently learned and adapted. So these are all pieces that are part of that show. Next. 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 So this was all at the 5th Parallel Gallery at the University of Regina. It's interesting because it had a black wall. It always had a black wall. And the stands that I made for the pieces were black metal. So if you stood back in the gallery, it had this really sci-fi kind of feel to it because everything looked like it was floating. All the objects. Next. So the part of my thesis for this exhibition was that all the pieces were an actual hockey ensemble, which was dedicated to my father, because when we were kids, he drove us around and followed an Indigenous hockey team for quite a few winters, and that Indigenous hockey team became our superheroes. And so the Art Exhibition 17 became a time machine that would go back in time and collect all my father's memories and preserve them. And so next. So the pieces were all against the wall, and there was a 17-foot circle, and I made these 17 objects that kind of looked like tadpoles. And so when you stood in the middle, you would transform or go through a time travel process. Some people that came to the exhibition that were very, very traditional understood exactly what it was, and the tadpole motifs were going counterclockwise, and I didn't even realize that. And then one of my friends said, "I know why they're going counterclockwise." And she said, "Because you're going back in time." I said, "That's right." And so it's interesting how some people really understood it without even really asking any questions. They already knew what it was. Dave Garneau was one of my supervisors at the U of R. And after I graduated, he came up to me and he says, "Kevin," he goes, "how does this time machine work?" And I said, "David, I can't teach you to be Indigenous." So I kind of got him back there. You know, me and David have had a long relationship too, and it's been a bit rocky, put it that way. Anyways, we get along now. Next. How are we doing for time? Okay? 10? Okay, yeah, I can wrap it pretty quick. Yeah, so after 17, my next big exhibition was at the AGSM, and then I combined some of my older work with 17, and a couple of new buffalo skulls that I had next. So this is kind of a hot rod buffalo skull with a 350 Chevrolet. Next, custom hot rod skull. Next, and this was the piece at the AGSM where my curator, Lucy Letterhandler, she built this huge, I guess it's it was a little kind of like a hallway, and I had both of my triptychs, one on each side, and it was when you walked in there, it was almost like walking through a time machine, because you'd think you'd walk through this sort of little hallway, and you'd swear you'd be in a different time zone when you walked out. It was very sci-fi and kind of very freaky kind of feeling. Next. Healing Together. This was the sculpture that was commissioned by the President's Office at Brandon University. Basically, they wanted to have a sculpture that was dedicated to truth and reconciliation. And they were going to put up a public call for artists. And then my department approached the president and they said, "Hey, we already have an Indigenous artist here." so the president said, "Oh, maybe I'll ask Kevin to do it." And so then he came to me and asked me, "Would you like to do this sculpture?" And so I said, "Yeah, of course I will." And so this was the maquette. The maquette is basically, I think, about 22 inches high. And the president was so impressed with that. He's like, "Yeah, well, let's make this." And then I gave him the maquette. He was so happy. And so next. And this is the upscaled version coming off of the trailer after it's been fabricated at a shop really close to BU. It's basically like 2 blocks away from BU where they fabricated it. So I found it interesting that basically, they poured this really amazing platform for this piece. It took weeks from the pour, and it does include LED lights and everything, so super high tech. There wasn't really any ceremony. They just basically pulled it off the trailer, and then just sort of plunked it right onto the spot there and bolted it in. So I was thinking, okay, that's pretty cool. But I was really pleased with the piece, and people are really gravitate towards it. Next. There's a drone footage of it, which I found really interesting. Next. Okay, hot rod moccasins. So we're going back to 12 midnight. And so, and also shredding Vickers as well. So I designed this set of moccasins. First did the logo is the Pontiac arrow, and so I found that it's such an iconic logo that if it was beaded, it would be even more iconic. And so when I put these moccasins together, I intentionally wanted it to have a hot rod kind of aesthetic. So this is the black leather is refurbished from a black leather jacket, and I purchased some red crushed velvet, because sometimes that's part of a hot rod interior. It's very, very vibrant, and also the materials really there's a real contrast in materials as well. And then there's this fake black fur around the back of the moccasins. Next. And so I made 2 pairs of these moccasins, and one pair has the Pontiac arrow, and the other has a sort of a motif of a hot rod flame. This was made for the Dunlop Art Gallery exhibition last year. It's called Edge of 17, and the hot rod flames, the pair with the hot rod flames, was collected by the Dunlop Art Gallery for their permanent collection. So I was really happy with that. Next. So we're getting close to our exhibition now. So the Conan imagery was basically my curator at the Dunlop Art Gallery, Thomas Johnson, was saying, "Hey, we got some extra room on the walls here." He goes, "Do you think you could make something for that?" I said, "Yeah, I can make you some paintings," but I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. And so I found this box of Conan the Barbarian magazines in my office, and they belonged to my brother, back in the 80s. My brother passed away in 1991, and so I hadn't seen these magazines for ages. And I remember looking at them when I was like 17 years old, and I just loved the Conan character. And I always thought he was indigenous, like a Cree. And so, next. So this is sort of the beginning of the indigenous superhero concept. And so I did this large-scale painting of Conan, and of course he's saying truth and, because I just finished the truth and reconciliation sculpture titled Healing Together. So I was a bit sort of worn out from that, and I didn't want to put truth and reconciliation, like Conan saying truth and reconciliation. He wouldn't say that. And so it's up to the viewer to put in, the remaining part of that saying, and that could be anything. And I suggest it would be anything but reconciliation. I have a few choice words for that. Next. And so this is just one of the panels that I appropriated the image from. And this is very much like the Roy Lichtenstein sort of style from the 1960s pop art or surge. Next. And so I started putting these phrases in Conan's mouth, or this was from Marcus Aurelius. You have the power over your mind. You'll find strength in being indigenous. So I'm just changing everything around to indigenous. Next. And this is an Aristotle. An Aristotle saying. Next. And so this is one that's in the show, and I'm really proud of this one because basically I was trying to use the word noble in this painting, and I couldn't figure out a way how to use that word. But I remembered the movie or the film Casablanca, and at the very end, the Humphrey Bogart character Rick Lane is sending off his girlfriend who he really loves, and he says, "I'm no good at being noble." And then I said, "Yeah, that's perfect. We'll use that line." And so I'm no good at being noble, just deadly. And so I thought it was a great way for the Cree superhero to have a phrase. And in Indigenous culture, being deadly is you're way up here, like you're way up here, or you can be way down here, either or. So depending on the context, yeah, if you're really good at golf, then you're like, "Man, why are you so deadly?" And so, yeah, I was really happy to use that phrase and put it in with my superhero. Okay, next. And these two I made specifically for the exhibition. We talked, Stacey and I talked prior to the exhibition, and I said, I promise you I'm going to have two new paintings for this exhibition. And one thing I always tell my students when we're in the middle of a project and the project is almost done, or they've only got 1 week to finish a project, I tell them you have to work in the moment and problem solve in the moment. I had 1 weekend to do these two paintings, and I had to work in the moment and problem solve in the moment. So my philosophy for my students that I give them, I actually follow myself. And these two paintings came out, I thought they came out really nicely. So it's supposed to be a diptych, so they've got them in the wrong order here because they're supposed to go in sequence. So the gods have been good to me. I don't think I could be destroyed. So the minute you start thinking that you can't be destroyed, next. That's what happens to you. You're like, uh-oh. Maybe I shouldn't be thinking like that. So that's kind of the sequence that it was supposed to be in. Sorry about that. Next. So here it is. I really love this poster. It's awesome. Next. Okay, this is just an art statement. We'll go past that. This is for my current exhibition. So I just finished a 1-month residency at Wanuskewin Heritage Park, and it was an awesome experience in Saskatoon. And I worked every day at this residency, and got to walk around the trails. It's originally a buffalo jump, and so it's there's a really great institution there. They're trying to get UNESCO status there. I think they've almost got it. They have to go through a few more stages to get the UNESCO recognition to be a World Heritage Site. So I did borrow the name from that painting. So the title of my exhibition is not Noble, Just Deadly, because I was talking to my curator, Olivia Christoph, and I was saying I really like that term, like that phrase. And then she said, "Well, why don't we use it?" I said, "Okay, yeah, that sounds great." That was easy enough. And so next. So it took us quite a while to even get it to the prototype stage. And so we finally got prototype, got some pictures taken outside, made the poster, But then I had a ton of work to do for to get the rest of the images done, or the sculptures done next. So once again, I'm taking the components, breaking it down next, and then replicating these components and building next a full set of body armor. And the great thing was with this residency is I had my own space with windows, and the public could interact with me through a doorway that had like an upper and lower doors. And so they would open up, and people would ask me what I'm doing. I said, I'm building indigenous sculptural objects that are functional. And I said, they're designed for the indigenous superhero. Next. Next. So this is all the installation shots of the exhibition at one stand. Next. Next. There's me in the hot rod. I'm really happy with my car. It's 1963 Bel Air. I can't wait to get back to Brandon so I can start driving it. Next. And there's my best film noir shot. Next. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
We met at Brandon University. I'd
Yes.
heard of you before. I was so psyched to get to work together in the same department with you. The artist talk today, sometimes artists talk more about their practice, other times artists talk a little bit more about themselves as a person. I already know some of the stories behind the works, and I was hoping to hear some of the anecdotes about the 17 exhibition and the sort of the people who you've sort of made your work an homage to or to remember.
Yeah, I mean, 17 was basically, it was dedicated to my father. And it was very, very emotionally a tough thing to deal with. Because during my master's degree, I couldn't get a proper theme or a proper thesis together until things started getting really personal. And then Garneau kind of initiated that somehow. And I know that he's, sometimes he can be a little bit tough to deal with. And but I'm glad that he pushed me so far for this one, because basically we wouldn't have 17 if it wasn't for some of these things that happened. And but anyways, it was all about my indigenous way it was taught was from my father when I was very, very young. And then my father died when he was 39 years old, and I was 17. So all those memories were kind of gone as I grew up. And so in order to retrieve those memories, I had to make this exhibition. And that's why I stress that it's actually a time machine where I get to go back and collect all those memories and preserve them.
The stories behind the works are really moving.
Yeah.
We'll open the questions to the audience now. Questions from the audience.
Got mic 1 on? Mic 1.
Any questions from the audience?
Hi, once again, thank you so much for your talk. My question is, I don't know the full scope of the material, but from what you have shown so far, I noticed that the earlier promotional work was featuring a lot of your image. And even in your photos, you're always standing in there. And the exhibition ASAP, it was just your picture. I wanted to ask about this. Was this a choice, and how do you think your presence with the artwork, or sometimes even without the artwork, tells your story and practice?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've never really thought about it that much because basically, in a lot of exhibitions or a lot of circumstances, your image is connected to the artwork. So sometimes you will have an image. In most cases, you will. And so I want it to be an image that I approve of. This is, I don't want some random image that really wasn't, that I didn't really know about. That's why I used that Jordan Ben, yeah. Sorry, he's a buddy of mine. That's why I used that image, because it's kind of, it was taken at spur of the moment, but it was also sort of an image that I really gravitated towards. There's a couple other images that we use, but they're all kind of something. And the one that was in Resurrection, that was basically, I'm just posing for for a shot. But yeah, there's no artwork there, but sometimes you do that as the artist, and that's part of the process for me anyway. That's a good question, though.
That is a very interesting question, because sometimes artists don't have control of the way that they're spoken about or the way they're portrayed. So yeah, it is when you take control of the way that you're portrayed, and
yeah,
maybe that's
yeah. Well, it's I mean, it's much like the artwork. It's you want to have control over that. I mean, control over your own image isn't really that super important, but you know, it's, for me, it's something that I take a little bit personal. So.
great question. Any more questions from the audience? There's a hand up there.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for sharing once again. I wanted to ask about the religious themes in your earlier works, especially around, as you said, confrontation of those memories. And I wanted to ask more specifically how it felt to make pieces with confrontation like in mind or like in your body, and how you feel that making those pieces with the goal being confrontation actually changed your practice.
Yeah, that's a great question. The one piece that I was addressing in particular was Ghost and God, which was the big neon piece. And for me, that was there was a huge process to actually build that piece, and it was very intentional on my part to make sure that I had this giant Christian cross made out of acrylic. And so I made that piece at the Banff Center, by the way, on one of my residencies, and then I had the custom neon made prior to going there. And so it was very, very emotional for me to go through the process and putting it together. And like I said, I was contemplating this whole notion of it's going to be confrontational. Everybody's going to feel this confrontation. And then when the piece was finished, it was basically nobody had any of these confrontational feelings about the piece, because they basically just enjoyed the experience of being in the presence of that piece. And so it's true, the confrontation was only in me. And I think for that piece, that sort of got me over this little bit of an edge. And then after that, things weren't as confrontational, because I thought, okay, we've already resolved that part with dealing with my own issues of being brought up as a Christian, and then also introducing my Indigenous religious motifs to my work. But it was definitely a process, and I think that one was probably the one that resolved a lot of that. And then I think after that, I felt a lot more freedom as far as introducing those two conflicting kind of themes.
I think the idea of art is healing is sort of a big sort of a subject there then, hey? Has art making been a cathartic process for you then? Or?
Well, it's always been definitely part of, like Dana was saying, you know, in one of her essays, that it is a self-portrait in a sense, but also there's ways of me to sort of look at, resolve things from my past, and this whole notion of healing is very prominent in my work, and I think that sometimes it's not just about me. Maybe it's about somebody else that can have an experience with my piece that's Indigenous and might feel that they have it can lead to healing maybe in somebody else's experience as well. And so for me, that's part of, not necessarily an intentional thing, but if that ever happens, then it's definitely, I'm very, very pleased with that.
And in the exhibition Honky Tonk Chapel, we've sort of created this chapel, this sort of quiet, contemplative, meditative space for people to spend time with the work.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that the way that it's actually set up, it functions really well in that sense, because you do get to sit there in front of the piece, and oftentimes you'll probably be by yourself, or you're with somebody else, and like I said, the piece itself, it activates the space in a certain way that you will sort of get into this meditative state, or you know, find a way to get there.
Mm-hmm. When Dana Warren saw your new painting, she said, "I feel like there should be punk music blaring from here." So we sort of have the outside, the sort of the punk, the Cree superhero barbarian, and then we have sort of this quiet sort of contemplative space in the next room. Any more questions from the audience? Stevie?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the materials that you use to make the casts, because there's so many ways to cast an object, and I'm wondering about why you chose polyurethane over anything else. Have you tried anything else, or what you really?
No, not really. Basically, the original 3 or 4 were going to be crystal clear, and so the only material that I could find was this crystal clear polyurethane, and it was extremely hard to work with. The first 4 attempts didn't work out. Because it was basically like a hollow cast, and when I pulled it out of the mold, they just basically flattened out like a pancake, and so that was very discouraging. With that particular material, it has to be very, very exact as far as your measurements, as far as the way that you handle that material. It's also very toxic and things like that. And after that, that's when I started using the carbon fiber and things like that. That's where the opaque pieces came in, and I could paint them whatever color I wanted. In other words, I could use the hot rod motifs on them.
I don't think you explained in your talk why you were using a different material instead of the skull itself.
Oh yeah, well that's to me that it's something that it made perfect sense to me, because basically using the actual buffalo skull in an exhibition, there's a lot of protocols, and when I've come across buffalo skulls in the past, it was either in ceremony or they were somebody's personal object. And so for me, in order for me to utilize that motif, that was sort of my vehicle to get around that protocol and say, okay, well, I'm not going to use the actual buffalo skull. I'm using this simulation of the buffalo skull. But the way that I looked at it, it still held all of its symbolism.
It was the same for the pipe ceremony pieces as well.
Yes, yeah, it was, and at that time I was still on Facebook, and then somebody on Facebook was saying that you shouldn't be doing that. That's not the right protocol, blah, blah, blah. And then that's one of the reasons I got off Facebook. But a good friend of mine said, no, that it's fine.
Any last questions from the audience? I think there's one there.
I just had a question about, like you mentioned, your influence from your father and your brother in terms of the hockey gear and the comic book motifs. I was wondering where all the influence for your hot rod motifs came from. Was that related to your upbringing or your family, or was it just a personal interest?
Well, the hot rod sort of motifs and all that was basically, I did kind of grow up with in that sort of muscle car era. So I was exposed to a lot of like that type of like muscle cars and things like that. But one of my best friends when I was really young, he was a car designer and maker. He would make hot rods all the time. I had an old Firebird that I used to drive. But my first car was a 1970 Chevelle, which is basically kind of the classic sort of muscle car. And then in recent years, when I was constructing the sculpture for the Brandon University, we were making my hot rod at the same time as the sculpture, so the sculpture and the hot rod are tied together. So the one you see in the last image is a car that I currently own, and yeah, it's tied to the healing together. Not that the hot rod was healing, but it's a very loud car, and really, it gives me a thrill to kind of drive it. So.
I wanted to ask too, this 12 Midnight, was he also a hot rod artist, or who was 12 Midnight?
Yeah, 12 Midnight was definitely a hot rod artist. He was also a rockabilly musician. He had a huge following in East Vancouver around the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. He had a huge following. And I got introduced to him through the Helen Pitt Gallery in Vancouver. When I had my first show there in 1999, and I got to hang out with 12 Midnight and I Brain Eater and all the rest of the crew that was part of that underground lowbrow culture. And so I've always gravitated towards that lowbrow culture, and I think it's reflected definitely in the show that I have currently here.
Yeah, I thought we could get a chance to speak about that as well, that this lowbrow sort of culture, like where did this come in? Did someone at some point label or browbeat you, or where did the label lowbrow come in?
It's a label that I actually put on my work. It's basically because I thought that sort of being part of that sort of underground culture could be introduced into my work, and I really appreciate this intersection between lowbrow and highbrow art, and I've been in those situations a few times. I remember my show at the McKenzie Art Gallery in 2006. I had a show which I find is a highbrow institute, and then I had a lowbrow show in a gallery in Vancouver called the Gem Gallery. I don't know if anybody remembers that, the Gem Gallery. And so I had a show there and the show there at the McKenzie. So I had a highbrow show and a lowbrow show at the same time. And so I do appreciate that intersection.
Any last questions from the audience? Okay, no, I guess we're going to call it there. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Kevin. We'll take a break. We'll be back in 15 minutes.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Stacey.
Thanks,